Hello, everybody. From the studio, Happy New Year. From the studio in the bonus room above the garage on the north side of Fort Mill, South Carolina, in the shadow of Charlotte, the buckle of the Bible Belt, and the foot of Mount Belzoni, this is the York County Democratic Party YouTube show podcast. We're now a podcast. We call it YCDP-TV. So yes, Happy New Year, and welcome to the first YCDP-TV program of 2024. The main topic of the show is an anti-trans bill that's working its way pretty quickly through the South Carolina legislature. And so the title of this program should be something like South Carolina Anti-Trans Bill. But I can't help myself. I'm calling this episode, Ain't No Kid in South Carolina Ever Been Whooped Upside the Head for Telling Their Parents That They Gay or Trans. Sorry. Okay, this is a long show. Well, all our shows are long shows. You probably already noted the length, somewhere on the YouTube, and you weren't scared away by that. So hopefully you can stick around for all of it or most of it. But, as always, that's up to you. Before we get started, and to make the show even longer, a couple of updates. The YCDP, York County Democratic Party, has a new chair. John Kralevich resigned last fall. And by the way, thank you, John, for your service. You were awesome. First Vice Chair Nikita Jackson has stepped up to take that position until we have our YCDP convention on March 9th. And I'm sure we're going to be telling you more about that convention as it gets closer. So I'm also sure that we're going to be doing a show with Nikita pretty soon. I would have had her on today's panel, but this has been a very busy weekend for the county leadership. So stay tuned. Also, we have a new website. Now, if you've been to the YCDP website sometime until recently, you may have noticed it was telling you all about Joe Cunningham running for governor. Well, all right, it's been overhauled and updated, and hopefully you will find it useful. There's lots of information about the upcoming presidential primaries and about voting in York County. So stop by there. The address is yorkscdems.org. yorkscdems.org. Now, you might have a hard time remembering that. So we've also got a couple of new addresses. YCDP.us. YCDP.us, United States. And also a memorable but kind of long to type in there, YorkCountyDemocraticParty.org. Okay, so YCDP.us or YorkCountyDemocraticParty.org, or the original YorkSCDems.org, all take you to the same place, to the same website. Now, speaking of the primaries, and we're going to plan on doing a show about that pretty soon, but briefly, this year's primary season is kind of confusing. You probably know that South Carolina is holding the first in the nation Democratic primary on February 3rd. The National Democratic Party wrested that privilege away from Iowa and New Hampshire because South Carolina provides a far more diverse spectrum of people that are in the party. And it may also have something to do with Jim Clyburn jumpstarting Joe Biden's campaign back in 2020. I don't know. Nobody's told me that. The Republicans, on the other hand, are sticking to their traditional calendar. So they're going to have a separate presidential primary, and that's going to be on February 24th. So 2 presidential primaries on different dates, both in February, and all the early voting and absentee voting that goes along with any kind of that thing like that. Those are just presidential primaries, no other offices. So there's going to be one more primary. It's going to be for all the other offices that are up for election this year. And that primary is June 11th. And fortunately, it's both Republicans and Democrats on that day. It also has early voting and absentee voting as well. So again, we're going to do a program about that. But if you want to get a jump on it, understanding what's going on, we got it all sorted out on our website under Voting in York County. So take a look at that. Okay, 2 more things. We're getting close to starting the real show. The new website gives us the opportunity to do an audio podcast, to add that to our media empire, the YouTube show. The audio podcast will usually just be audio that we've lifted from a YouTube episode, but it may be more convenient for you to just plug in the earbuds and big headphones and and play the audio from your phone, doing other stuff, chores, stuff like that. If you've got a podcast app, use it to look for YCDP-TV. You should be able to find that on most podcast apps. And that is almost all I've got to tell you. But there's one more thing. So before we get to our main topic, let's say hello once again to Lacey Lane. Hi, Lacey.
Hello.
Last year, we did some shows with you and some other folks from your organization called CAPE, looking at education in York County. And we talked about the shenanigans that the York County Council was doing with the library board. As we left things last year, they had passed all the things that they wanted to pass, and they were going to install new people in some of the positions on the library board. And can you bring us up to date on what has happened since and what the composition of that library board looks like and what it's doing?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, the York County Council got their way. They were able to appoint members by their own mouths that have a conservative agenda. And based on what we've learned from discussions about the library from the York County GOP meetings that they used to post monthly on YouTube, from public commentary by citizens at the York County Council meetings, as well as social media, we know what they want is control over the content on our library shelves and the types of programs that are offered. They want to ensure that it meets their narrow worldview rather than the actual needs of our community here in York County. So we have been keeping an eye on the library board, and things have been a little bit quiet since those 3 new members have been appointed until here recently. There have been some agenda items that were added at this last board meeting regarding the library mission and vision, as well as library programming. And what we know is they are wanting to narrow that mission and vision to make it less inclusive and to be able to sort of have some guidelines, some guardrails, as they like to say, about what can be at our libraries, whether it's services and or content on the shelves. So one of the new appointees, Dennis Getter, he is under the impression that there are library programs that are somehow unlawful. He read a vague statute about what's allowed or not allowed, and he believes that the programs and services that are offered, while he doesn't say the pride cafes and events that are supportive and inclusive of LGBTQ plus youth in our community, we know that's what he's talking about based on the agenda that they have spoken about in other settings. So his other major issues are the mobile hotspots. So our library has mobile hotspots to allow people to have internet access. They offer workforce development programming, including resume writing, LinkedIn profile assistance. And he says that these are some services that should not be by law offered, which is kind of strange. You would think you would want to have these programs as they support our members of the community, but for some reason he has taken issue with those.
Has he got anything, any leg to stand on in terms of what he's calling by law?
I mean, it's a very vague statute. We don't offer any services in York County that aren't offered across the state. So if someone finds him to be correct somehow, then that would be unlawful for all of the libraries across the state. So I don't think it holds water, but that is what he is trying to do right now. I think the real threat is the mission and vision, because that is more of a local guiding mission and vision for what we can and can't offer at our libraries. And as board members, he does have the right to question, and he does have the right to contribute ideas, but I think he forgets that he is also charged with promoting and supporting our York County libraries. So that's kind of what's not been happening. With our fast-paced growth here in York County, really the focus should be keeping on meeting the needs of our growing community and not the agenda that they are pushing so clearly. Their discussion of narrowing that mission and vision, these are the things that I think are going to be the most harmful. So at this point, what can we do to support our York County libraries? We got to flood them with our love for the services and the programs that they do offer. The board needs to hear our York County Council, because those are definitely the strings that are pulling those 3 new members. We need to make sure that both the York County Council and our library board are aware that we love and appreciate the services. So For our community members that take part and appreciate them, send an email. It's so quick to do. If maybe you don't take part, but you love that your community has access, that's okay too. Just let them know that we are so grateful for these opportunities. I think also a present at our library board meetings, just having that presence month to month is really going to show them that not only are we interested, but we are not letting them do this under the cover of darkness. We are making sure that we are shedding a light on these behind the scenes happenings. I know for me, I didn't even know that there was a board that, the York County Council made these appointments. There were so many things I just didn't know until I knew. And I think the more that we raise awareness within our community, the more active our community members can take part because, the library is a place that people love to support. But if they don't know that it's under attack, then they don't know that there's a need. So send those emails and show some love to our York County libraries.
As I recall, the library board folks said before this stuff came up from the council, nobody came to library board meetings. And then
absolutely,
suddenly there was overflow audiences. And now it's probably back to the board and your representative from Kate. Mm-hmm. And that's probably about it that's showing up. But you're still there. And
we're there. We're keeping that watchful eye. Yeah. We want to make sure that they know we're watching and that people do care and that we are reporting back and sharing with the greater community when there's a call to action. And right now that call is to simply email the York County Council and email the board and let them know that we love the programs and services that our libraries offer. And we appreciate that they are diverse and inclusive.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you for the update. Not a whole lot has happened yet. Probably not expecting a whole lot to happen that fast. But at any meeting, somebody can come up and say, we're going to make a big change. And you guys will let us know. All right, let's move on with our program. And here's the deal. There's a bill before the South Carolina House. It's already been through a subcommittee and a committee. Their hearings last week as we record this on Saturday, January 13th. The bill is H4624. They call it the Gender Reassignment Procedures Bill. I would like to call it the Ain't No Kid in South Carolina Been Whooped Upside the Head by Telling Their Parents They Are Gay or Trans bill. That's what I would like to call it. I don't think they're going to let me do that. This is South Carolina's version of legislation that's already been adopted in 22 other, mostly red states. It is designed to deny gender affirming care to minors, anyone under 18 in our case. We'll get the details of the bill coming up in a couple of minutes. At those hearings, this is before the House Medical, Military, Public, and Municipal Affairs Committee, which is a mouthful, and their Medical and Health Affairs Subcommittee. Last week, there was a long session of public comments. I think over 40 people spoke, I think. Of those, all but one spoke against the bill. There were doctors, mental health professionals, leaders of advocacy groups, more than a few transgendered people, all relating their experience with transgendered youth in North Carolina. And then, spoiler alert, the subcommittee and the full committee passed the bill, the party line vote, and sent it to the full House. And the House is going to look at it. We think the House is going to look at it next week. So we're going to dig into the bill, talk about what happened in those committees. The hearing ran over 3 hours. I've got some video. I've got too much video that I pulled from the hearing. Everyone's testimony was compelling. I choked up as I watched a lot of it. It was hard to leave anything out, but it was over 3 hours. We're going to look at maybe some of that video in this program, and I'll give you a link to be able to go watch the hearing itself if you're so inclined. Liberal use of fast forward buttons, and you can see just about everybody, but we'll see just a few. And so let's go on with the show. And mostly we're going to be talking to our guests. And here they are. Lacey, who I've met in just a moment ago, to screen right. I can never tell if it's my left or screen right. I'll just let Lacey's over there. And then in the bottom row here on Hollywood Squares, in the right is Jessica. In the middle is Dr. Martha Edwards. And lower left is Amberlyn. And let me have you guys introduce yourselves just a little bit. Lacey, although we've met you many times before and just talked to you, tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here doing this.
Sure. I am a parent of 2 children in public schools. I am a school counselor of 15 years. I am active in a couple local advocacy groups, one, CAPE, Community Advocates for Public Education, which obviously the focus is public ed, as well as the League South Carolina, which focuses on a lot of common sense issues. And I'm here because I just care deeply for my students and their safety and their well-being. And so, that's why I testified virtually this week in opposition of this bill, and have met so many other great advocates across the state, like some of whom joined us today. And I'm here because I care.
That sounds good. Jessica, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Jessica Spearman, and I am the parent of a trans kid. I'm also a mental health professional. I'm the president of PFLAG Anderson. I am here because this is my life. I am parenting a child that is trans, and also get to see kids within our communities that are trans who cannot tell their parents, but also those kids that can tell their parents. And I know that this is an issue of life or death for them.
Yeah. Did you like my title for the bill? The Ain't No Kid Been Whooped Upside the Head?
I absolutely adore it. I know that is the truth. Working with kids professionally, you get to see the parents a lot, and that is rings very true for me.
Yeah, that's going to be a big part of what we talk about, I think. PFLAG Anderson, explain what that is.
PFLAG Anderson is the oldest education, advocacy, and support group for those within the community, families, and parents of those within the community. We have built this one from the ground up just within the last year. I've been an advocate my whole life, but didn't have anywhere to kind of put that energy, and knew that for my kids' sake, I needed to create an environment in Anderson that was welcoming, and we didn't think it was going to do as great as it has. So we're very proud to have an Anderson chapter of PFLAG.
What part of the state is Anderson in?
Anderson is right on the Georgia line. So we're in the upstate, below Greenville County, next to Pickens, and below Greenville, next to Pickens County, and on the Georgia line.
Okay, so welcome virtually to York County. Did you go to the hearing?
I did. I testified.
PFLAG stands for, let me see if I can get this even close, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays.
We dropped the acronym several years ago to be more inclusive, because there's not an inclusivity of the trans community within that name. So now it's just PFLAG.
Okay, so you're IBM, KFC, everybody who's let go of all the words that followed it. Just PFLAG is cool.
Yes.
I was at doing some ham radio public service stuff at a Christmas parade up in Concord a couple weeks ago, and toward the end of the parade, there comes marching down with everybody else and all the floats and stuff. And just before Santa Claus was a PFLAG for, I think it was Cabarrus County. And I'm standing on the sidelines in my vest because I was doing some safety stuff, and I'm sticking my thumb up, and they saw me, and it's like I may have been the only person in the crowd that was cheering those guys, but at least, well, I hope I wasn't, but.
We actually participated in our Anderson City parade, and had so much affirmation from that. And I was worried to put a pride float in a Christmas parade in Anderson, South Carolina, but we were met with such love. I think everyone clapped and cheered. So yeah, those are always fun to do.
Yeah. So it probably wasn't only me. Amberlyn, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Amberlynn Boyder. My pronouns are she and her. I am a out and proud transgender woman. I am the parent of a beautiful 3-year-old little girl. I am the president of PFLAG Spartanburg. I am on the board of directors for the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network in Columbia. And I am a volunteer coordinator for the Uplift Outreach Center in Spartanburg, which is an LGBTQ safe space for LGBTQ youth.
And you were at the hearing and testified.
I was, and I did.
And I saw you there. Thanks for being here. And finally, Dr. Martha Edwards. Is Dr. Edwards, or can you just say Martha?
Martha's fine.
Okay. We're all friends here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're participating in this.
So I've been a pediatrician in this area for 25 years, and I've been a pediatrician for a little over 30 years. And what I've realized, especially in this area, by doing a lot of volunteer work and a little bit of work in a free clinic between about 2000 and 2014, is that there is a huge need for mental health care in our area. And well before COVID or anything else, I was seeing this escalation of mental health issues. And so one of my priorities is really trying to figure out how we as a state can do better and how we in pediatric offices can do better at supporting kids with mental health needs. And a big population that is at risk for mental health needs is the LGBTQ community of kids. They tend to be, especially in this state, more marginalized, more, less accepted. I think often they don't feel safe. And one reason is because of bills like this, that I think our legislature targets them when there are a lot of other things that they could be doing to support mental health in our state. And those things should be priority right now, not bullying the kids that need their help the most. And so that's one thing that really drew me to this issue and to this specific bill, is that I feel like it really targets some of the kids who are most at risk. There was a recent study about all teens that went to the ER, and over half that were screened for any kind of depression or suicide, over half endorsed thoughts of suicide. And we know that about 1/3 in our state have made attempts. So that's where I'm coming from.
Before we talk about the legislation, I want to learn a little bit of everybody here. Amberlynn is a trans representative, I guess. But Jessica, you have a trans kid. Very basics. What does it mean to be transgendered?
That's a frustrating question for a lot of people who have black and white thinking, because to be trans, there's a lot of nuance in them. My personal experience was a life where existing was about the best level of happiness that I could reach. I, for a long time, did not really understand why. I knew that I resonated with and more easily made friends with other women, other girls in school. I was harassed a lot in school because I didn't perform boyhood properly. I was very often called a derogatory term for a gay person. They just didn't know what I was what I was carrying with me. And eventually, for me, later on in life, after I had been married, after I had adopted a child, I simply ran out of mental capacity to deal with pretending to be a man anymore.
So that's after you had been married as a man married to a woman?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and had a child.
And we adopted a child. And 3 years ago, I came out to my wife, who is still with me, and we continue to raise our child together. And the result of receiving that care that we keep saying is medically necessary is at 34 years old, for the first time in my life, I was able to look in the mirror, recognize the person who was there, and not want to kill them.
I will say, I actually asked this question to my kid because they're the expert of their own body. So the response that I got back was, I am a man trapped in the wrong body. And like Amberlyn said, it's pretty nuanced. I know that there is a clinical definition, but each and every case can be different. And how you present can be different. How you choose to present can be different. But it for all intents and purposes, you just feel like you're born in the wrong body. I know for my child, at 2 years old, I can remember that he would go by male identifiers such as, I want to be a dad. I want to be the king. And we always knew that this was probably going to be the route that we took, much more masculine presenting. We just kind of always knew. And it wasn't a problem for us. So my child had the ability to be able to express those things and be open and honest with us.
Martha, Dr. Edwards, as a pediatrician, do you have some specific things that you either technically or legally or just medically need to recognize in someone who is transgender?
I guess what I would say in my experience is that every child is different. So that, if I have a trans child or a child that comes in expressing gender dysphoria, sometimes all those kids need is support, not someone saying, oh, I don't think you are. And sometimes parents provide that. I guess in my experience, again, fortunately with the kids that I've seen, their parents have been very supportive. And usually by the time they come to me, the parents are the ones that are asking for help. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. Some kids, many homeless kids in our state have been kicked out of their homes because they've come out to their parents. And that's why it's not safe for teachers to have to, quote, out kids, or for me or for a counselor to have to do that. But yeah, I mean, we need to support kids where we are, is been my experience. And some kids need just a little support. They may never need hormone therapy. They may never need puberty blockers. They may be comfortable where they are with cross-dressing or, being able to participate in sports where they feel like they fit in the best. And then some kids need more support than that. They become very distressed with where they are mentally. And so those are the kids that I think that, sometimes they do need more support. I think there's this whole myth about pediatricians kind of going under the radar and trying to do things surreptitiously with kids. And I don't even know how we'd begin to do that. There are some kids that really I wish we could do that for. But we really do need to work with parents and whole families. And actually, it's the opposite of that. I see parents' rights being taken away, and the parents' ability to decide what's best for their children is completely ripped away with this bill. The families I see will be devastated. The parents will be devastated by the outcome of this bill if it passes.
Yeah, there is a dichotomy in parents' rights that Lacey got some questions about when you were doing your testimony. I think we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit later. But I want to go a little bit more. I got some questions about being transgender that I've wondered about, and hopefully I can speak for the audience, saying, tell me a little bit more. Does being transgender necessarily mean you are gay or queer?
Sometimes, and that's kind of the answer with a lot of things in the LGBTQ community. I am married to a cisgender woman, and therefore we are seen as queer or lesbian or whatever.
And
I'm primarily attracted to women.
Okay.
And however, there are lots of trans women out there who are primarily attracted to men. There are lots of trans men out there who are primarily attracted to women, and they would be straight. So
straight. They would be straight in their transition to gender.
Yeah. It's just an adjective. A trans woman is a woman, just like a cis woman is a woman. A trans man is a man, just like a cis man is a man. And so if you have a trans man with a cis woman or a trans man with a trans woman, that's a straight couple.
And Martha, you alluded to this a moment ago with how you handle various children in their stages of development. But does being trans require surgery?
There is no surgery being done on children under the age of 18 in our state. And that's just never been a thing. I mean, that's kind of one of those myths that's a real big problem in our state. So that's just not happening.
I think you touched on a very important point, which is there hasn't been a case in South Carolina. And I think a lot of people who really support this bill, or even people who are kind of wringing their hands on the center left, will say, well, if those kids can make it, why can we just not make that the protocol? Why can we not make it to where everyone, can't begin treatment until a certain age? And the answer to that is there are rare cases where this type of treatment is necessary. And even though it is not standard practice to do it, there are some extreme cases like, pop artist Kim Petras comes to mind. I think she underwent gender affirming surgery at 16. Again, doctors are well trained, psychologists are well trained to identify, okay, here is a list of potential side effects of this treatment. And here is the very real possibility that we have a dead child on our hands. A lot of people on the right want to say, well, if those surgeries aren't happening in South Carolina, and if the usage of puberty blockers is rare, then why do you not want to ban them? And the answer is for the fringe cases. I know painfully well the permanent and irreversible damage that a natural puberty does to a trans body. And in my case, if I could have spared myself that pain, I would have.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are really good points. And, what I would say is I think that the fear that a lot of our legislators are seeing online is that a lot of kids, where it's a phase, and that kids will regret anything they've done later on. And I think, as Dr. Mack testified, we have about 2,000 trans kids, we think, in South Carolina. And we know that less than 1% ever do regret transition. And so, yes, it is something but the vast majority get benefit from treatment according to the way they and their families feel that they're going to do best. And so supporting that according to the needs of that patient and trying to avert risks of suicide is the goal.
Yeah. I mean, my only regret was that I didn't do it sooner.
That is probably one of the larger regrets in our family, is that we didn't do this sooner for our child. It was difficult for us to make that decision because we knew legislation was coming that might end that health care for our child. And as necessary as it is, this has been a 10-year journey for us. It's not something that just happened that we immediately did. It was very thought out, well planned, and went along with how our child was identifying. We didn't start out with a trans child. We started out with a gender non-conforming child. And it evolved from there. It became different as we went along. And I do believe that we're at a process now where, even though we are receiving the gender affirming care, we're still not to the point of having, hormone replacement therapy. We're working on the mental health and ensuring that my child has the necessary skills and our family has the necessary skills to deal with the things that happen outside of our home that are not as welcoming. And seeing my child have to listen to state legislators basically say that they are not worthy of health care. I think those are the harder things that we deal with.
And I'll say I had a conversation with my representative about this issue. And one of his, I felt like he was really seeking to understand better, but then was disappointed in his vote. But one of his questions was, when I was growing up, we had, girls that were tomboys in our neighborhood, and we had boys that were more feminine, but they all got through and they didn't need puberty blockers. But I would say it's the same with anything that we learn, and we have better options now. We know how to support those folks better. And a lot of those folks are people who got into marriages that they maybe didn't work out because they were trying to be someone they weren't, because of how their communities wanted them to be. And that a lot of that, sometimes that can be very difficult in families. And I think it's great that Amberlynn's situation has worked out as well as it has. That's not always the case for families. And so I think it's very family supportive and very family friendly to actually support kids, in trying to figure out who they are and being who they are when they're in adolescence.
I think back to, I do live in a very rural county. And in 1992, I had the most amazing and beautiful trans aunts in Piedmont, South Carolina. And there are still comments that will be made to me about, do you remember that person that worked at a certain place that was fully in the public eye? And what was that about? And I'm like, well, you're talking about my aunt, and she was amazing. So we have much more of a lengthy history. I'm talking about the 90s, and that seems like yesterday, but also many, many years ago, and to look back and see how brave she was in the 90s, and to be able to be authentically who she was in her 50s is when she transitioned. So I think that Martha's right. We have come a long way, but now we're taking steps back. In the 50s, it wasn't as acceptable, but there were still trans individuals then.
I guess looking historically, there have been trans individuals since humanity crawled out of the swamps. None of this just happened in this century or last century. It's a ton of nuance, and politicians aren't good at nuance. So I was asking about surgery a while ago, and if a surgery was required. Let me ask about adults. Can you be a trans adult with no surgery?
Yes. You may not have access to surgery. That surgery may not be something that you want to pursue. And I know that the reactionary response to that is, oh, well, you're telling me someone with a penis could be in the bathroom with me, and therefore I'm at risk. Almost as if cis women are not capable of doing sexual assault. So the whole bathroom argument, I don't understand anyway. But I would argue that probably one of the biggest reasons we need to support trans people who do not have gender affirming surgery is because it's very, very, very hard to get, and that's not their fault.
Along that line, what is polite, what is impolite or rude to ask a trans person that you may have just met about their life? And for most of us, if you meet a trans person and you know that they're trans, they may be the only one that you've met that you know. What is rude to ask? What what's okay to ask?
Just think about what you would want to be asked. You do not want to be asked about your genitals. You don't want to. We don't walk up to people on a daily basis and say, "What kind of genitals do you have?" We do ask people, however, "What do you do for work? Tell me your story." Things like that. And a lot of people will say, "I feel like I have to walk on eggshells around the LGBTQ community." And I think that's a cop-out. I think that's someone announcing that they have to behave differently around you than they would otherwise, which probably means they're not that affirming of a person.
But you probably get people are, even people who are going to be in your camp, on your side, are still going to be curious.
There's a ton of clumsy language. Yeah. Absolutely right. If someone was talking about me 10 years ago, it's kind of funny to watch people who have never met a trans person before, and they're trying to do unnecessary mental gymnastics because they would, if you were going to talk about me 10 years ago, they would be, back 10 years ago, well, you were so-and-so then, and blah, 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 blah. And it's unnecessary. I am me. I'm not a different person. I'm the same person. I just am in different packaging now. Yeah. And so I was Amberlyn 10 years ago. I just didn't realize it yet. I am a woman just like any other cis woman. It's not necessary to go through the gymnastics of this. Well, she's M to F and blah, blah, blah. And so I would say don't think about it too much. You see a woman talk to a woman. You see a man talk to a man. It doesn't have to be awkward, and you don't have to overcomplicate it.
And I would guess if they become a part of your life, if you become friends and have a relationship, an ongoing relationship, you can learn more as they're comfortable telling you about it. Is it important to pass, to be recognized immediately in the general public as the identity, as a gender you identified with? If you're at any point in transition, and we're mostly talking about adults now, if you're any point in transition, if you've transitioned and are out there in public, is it important to make it obvious to everybody which gender you are identifying with?
I was going to give other people a chance to speak, but that I want to jump all over this question. From a safety aspect, yes, 100%. It is safer for you as a trans person if you pass, because you're not drawing extra attention to yourself. However, passing has nothing to do with your validity in your gender identity. And anyone who starts a transition in the first months, the first year, it is it's very messy. I was terrified every time I went to the grocery store. I was terrified every time I went somewhere without my wife or without a friend or anything like that. And at most, in those early phases, I was fortunate. I got some looks, but no one was really all that outwardly hostile toward me. I do have the benefit of, and the privilege, I count it as a privilege, if a trans person can have a privilege, but my privilege is that I do feel like I pass better than a lot of trans people, and certainly better than I did earlier in my transition. And at the point that I realized, when you're at the grocery store, people are aware of vague human-shaped objects near them, but largely they're just looking for the 12 pack of toilet paper or whatever. They're not very interested in who's in there with them. So to be very, very clear about what I'm saying, if there are any transgender people watching, or if you know a transgender person who you can very evidently tell they're trans, so what? You know what they're shooting for. And if you're not sure what they're shooting for, just ask them what their pronouns are and treat them with dignity and respect, because their identity has nothing to do with how attractive you think they are.
Ask them what their pronouns are. That sounds like a good way to sort of answer or ease into that question. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
I want to say, from the safety aspect, I have the honor and the privilege of being around Amberlyn a lot. That's my PFLAG sister. And the safety aspect, I think, is important for people to understand that no one is going into the bathroom to do anything other than go to the bathroom.
Yeah,
I've in many places, nothing bad ever happened.
Yeah. I was going to say, I've never looked under stalls to just confirm, what is that about? I was going to ask that question, though, Amberlyn, is because that is something that in my experience, that when I have asked that question, what are your pronouns? And I probably should ask them to every single patient I see, but often when I do ask, I can just feel this barrier come down. But I was also going to ask, is that offensive? Because, if I'm not sure, does that mean that you're feeling like you're not passing?
Yeah, that's it. It is one of those things that, me being self-aware enough to know that I am hypercritical about my appearance. I am hypercritical about my body. And if someone asks me, what are your pronouns? That there is a tinge of that first instinct of, you're being androgynous and I can't really tell. But, in those moments, I remind myself, this is someone who's signaling that they're a safe person, and this is someone who wants to make sure they get it right. So I would never discourage someone from asking someone their pronouns. Because
you're someone I wouldn't ask.
My perception of that is that that's a me problem that I need to work on.
I was going to say, I wouldn't ask you. It's more when I sincerely have and I'm dealing more with younger people. But it's, I had an African-American, I guess, female, and I asked pronouns, and she, her, and I said, and my next question was, I know you don't have a relationship right now, but if you were going to date someone, who would you be interested in? And she said, a girl. And I was just in a relationship with a girl. And so I think those are important. But what I wanted to say was, because that also opened a conversation, what I wanted to get at with her was that I was a safe person to discuss this with. And then I was able to say, have you talked about this? And this is an 18-year-old. Have you talked about this with your mom? And she had tried and it hadn't gone well. And so just, in my purpose in trying to keep her healthy was to let her know that she's fine, and that this is not something to be ashamed of. And that I hope that someday she could talk to her mom. But in the meantime, here's the Trevor Project. Here are some other, avenues for you to get in touch with someone who'll be supportive. But yeah, it's always hard because I thought, well, is this someone that's trying to pass? But generally that's not my problem, because I'm usually with people who are more searching for who they are. And, but I feel like if pediatricians can be of help in sorting out, just being able to feel safe with who they are and helping have a conversation with parents they're ready for that, then that's a role that we can play, I hope.
The concept of pronouns, I'm not sure how many years I have been familiar with it, but as someone who has lived most of their adult life on the progressive side of politics, I'm pretty new to the concept of what are your pronouns. And people who have not lived their life on the progressive side of politics may be completely unaware of the concept of pronouns. If anybody in the audience is wondering about that and saying, would somebody please clue me in and fill me in? I identify as he, him. That's my gender identity. It's a cisgender identity because I was born male. I've been male all my life. And but in the world of being progressive and being sensitive to all of these things, those are my pronouns.
I know that I have notated incorrect pronouns at points in times. I've been corrected the first couple of times that I did it. And am I doing it to be harmful? No, but is it harmful? Yes. When it comes to my child rarely corrects people. And just because they're, different personality types are different. So my child will not be as corrective, but will look at somebody and be like, hey, I'm a dude. They are simply just pronouns. We can correct them and move on and not make it about ourselves.
I actually like it when people say thank you, because I've had people maybe not misgender me, but I've heard them misgender other people. And that person would say, actually, I use he, him pronouns. And the response is, oh, thank you. As like, oh, that was a reminder. I've got some friends who I was friends with for 12 years before I transitioned. And once in a blue moon, they'll be talking about a memory and use the wrong pronoun or the wrong name. And they just go into this huge apologetic spiel. And in that moment, I feel like I have become a giant inconvenience for everyone. So like, if you screw up, it's fine. Most of us will just be, just say like, sorry and move on. Or if you're corrected, say thank you and move on and leave it at that, because we spend so much time in everyone's view. We would appreciate the opportunity to not be in the center of attention once in a while.
One last question before we get in. Next thing is politics. I'm going to talk about politics in a minute, but one more question. What's the relation, and this may be a 30-minute question, I don't know. What's the relationship between the trans community and the rest of the LGB plus community? I understand it's not always as copacetic as we might want it to be.
My experience has been that just like in a lot of marginalized people groups, when one group starts to see acceptance from historically combative people, they will take that acceptance and then begin shutting out other groups, pulling up the ladder behind them, as it were. I've been very fortunate that the lesbian, gay, and bisexual people in my life are very accepting of me, but that is a little bit of an issue. I would say it's relatively minor, but it is concerning because, we're already such small minorities. The last thing we need is fractures. Unfortunately, there are some people on the far right who are very good at crafting narratives that can create fractures on the left, and especially in people who are moderate left.
I do hear a lot of times that, there's education to be had. With PFLAG, we see everyone within the rainbow continuum come in and out of our meetings. And, there's a heavy focus right now on the trans community because of the legislation that's going through. And it's a privilege to be able to marry who you want at this juncture and to receive healthcare that you need at this point. So there is privilege of that acceptance, like Amberlyn said. And I believe it's just education is that I don't understand because, I woke up, I was a male that was attracted to other males, or I was a female that was attracted to other females. And that's a privilege that I get to live in this world with, a form of acceptance. Is it still a minority? Absolutely. But the minority of the minority is they didn't wake up feeling like they were in the wrong body. And they don't tend to understand what that means. They understand what their perspective is as one minority, but need a little bit of education to further understand the trans community.
So I was not wrong. My perception of what's going on out there is fairly accurate. And something I didn't bring up, but probably should have a little bit earlier, is in terms of making a program like this. And as Amberlyn was noting, that the rest of the LGBTQ plus community has had a lot of acceptance over the past decade or so. Gay marriage is legal. Representation in media is widespread. Those two things probably work together to create each other. The trans community is the current, you got a target on your back from the right wing. I get to live in a variety of communities. One of them is the white male community, the bros. They feel free in front of me, not knowing very much about who I am, to do their locker room talk. And the disparagement of gays and everybody else on that side of things is commonplace still. But when they know they're speaking more in public to a variety of people, it's still more acceptable to them to disparage trans people. And if we're seeing it not only in just general society, but in legislatures, that's what this is all about. Legislatures are still finding it acceptable to target trans people. And so hopefully at some point you all will be able to join the whole club, and your life will get better. But for now, you're bringing up the tail end of this wagon. That that's what this bill is all about. What did I call it? Ain't no kid in South Carolina been whooped upside the head by their parents for telling them they're gay. Politics. My notes tell me I want to play a little video here. They did an introduction of of this bill in the subcommittee, and introduced by a Republican, as you might expect. This lasts about 5 minutes or so. He gets challenged a little bit by one of the Democrats on the committee. I think that this will be illustrative of what we're all going through in terms of trying to understand why we're getting legislation like this in a state like South Carolina. So let's take a look. Have I got everything ready to play? I think so.
My name is Mark Smith. I want to officially call our meeting to order for the Medical and Health Affairs Subcommittee. Our next bill is House Bill 4624, Gender Reassignment Procedures.
This is a bill to prohibit the provision of gender transition procedures to a person under 18 years of age, to prohibit the use of public funds for gender transition procedures, and to provide penalties to prohibit public school staff and officials from withholding knowledge of a minor's perception of their gender from the minor's parents, among other things.
We have Representative John McCravey to review the bill with us.
There are few things we do as legislators that are more important than protecting vulnerable children. One of those important legislative protections that has come to pass is to protect minors from so-called gender transition procedures. The first thing it does is protect minors from the use of hormone drugs known as puberty blockers. These drugs block the normal puberty hormones released by the body that cause normal development of a child's reproductive organs. Growing evidence shows that puberty blockers are not safe and result in irreversible physical, not to mention emotional damage. The FDA has warned that this carries a risk of a rare condition called pseudotumor cerebri that can cause swelling of the optic nerve, headache, vomiting, elevated blood pressure, paralysis. Also, because they prevent the natural development of reproductive organs, the Endocrine Society has warned that there's a lack of data on whether the use of these drugs may result in a greater incidence of infertility. Researchers in the UK are now concerned about the negative effects on the brain itself from these drugs. And numerous studies have already proved that puberty blockers seriously diminish bone density of children. The second thing this bill does is protect minors from the irreversible effects of cross-sex hormones. This is where a biological girl, for instance, may be given testosterone, or a biological boy is given estrogen. Extended use of cross-sex hormones will sterilize a child for life. They damage the testes in males and the ovarian function in females. 3 different studies show that cross-sex hormones carry an increased risk of stroke, blood clots, and other cardiovascular issues, and this damage is irreversible. The third thing this bill does is protect minors from radical and irreversible surgeries, and it's all tied together. The facts are that 98% of children who receive puberty blockers go on to get the cross-sex hormones, and then that 97% of those go on to have irreversible surgeries. And the sad part is, the fact is that when left alone, 85 to 90% of young people with gender dysphoria return to identify with their biological sex by adulthood. It's also a fact that approximately 60% regret their choice later when they go through with these procedures. You know, you might have seen this on 60 Minutes. Just go back and look at the 60 Minutes documentary they did on this a couple of years ago.
We were concerned that the groups that oppose transgender people might try to weaponize our story and use it against transgender people. Some of the activists who reached out to us told us they were worried about it too.
The bill is medically sound. It's been reviewed by medical experts and contains extensive exceptions for any congenital abnormalities, as well as certain developmental disorders, and certainly any procedures needed by injury that would place a person at risk for impairment or serious bodily function or death. Mr. Chairman, this summarizes the bill, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
You were putting out a lot of stats there, so I just wanted some clarification. The 60% regret rate that you mentioned, what was the source of that?
I believe there are several studies out there. I've reviewed a lot of them.
The one that you were quoting.
Well, I can't. I'll give it to you after this hearing. I'll be glad to go find it for you.
So that 60% regretting quote, you don't have the source for that?
I know that there was one, at least one or more, and they vary. You know, I'm not going to say that every one of them is 60%, but there's at least one or two that say 60%.
For clarification, you said it was a fact, but you don't have the source for that fact?
Well, it's a fact that there are studies that show that. The fact is that when left alone.
But you don't have the source for that fact?
Well, it's a fact that there are studies that show that.
But you don't have those studies that
I told you I can get them to you after this hearing. I don't want to bring out a study in the middle of a hearing and try to find it and all that, but I'll be glad to get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
I see people shaking their heads as I could watch you guys on the Zoom.
I will eat my shoes if John McCravey has ever read a medical study in his life.
Yeah. I was going to say, just as we're getting started with this, reacting to it, if anybody feels the need to utter a profanity, we can put the explicit warning on the show and you can say how you feel. So Representative Moore challenged him on one thing, but I'm guessing you guys would like to challenge him on everything else.
McCravey, he didn't even stay in there for the rest of the hearing. He didn't listen to the professionals in South Carolina. He didn't listen to the families. He didn't listen to any of us. He didn't stay in there. So to come across with an antecedent study that is probably not reliable and probably not valid is ludicrous to me.
Well, one that they keep talking about is this Swedish study. And it's really fascinating to me because the author of that study wrote that lawmakers who are using their study to pass any trans laws are misinterpreting it as the exact opposite of the intent of the study, because there are scientific and medical terms in there that look scary to someone who's never read a medical study in their life. He talks about a 60 Minutes interview. He talks about one study, and then he talks about believing that there are 2 or 3 studies. And then we saw later in the testimony by Phil Ford, who's a lobbyist for SC United, he had a binder that thick, full of studies that come to the same conclusion that all of the major medical associations come to. So this is literally just politicians putting their fingers in their ears and saying my personal beliefs mean more than a mountain of data.
Their personal beliefs and what they're afraid their constituents will vote them out for if they express something they understand different. He said that the puberty blockers are not safe. We haven't really detailed what a puberty blocker is. Yeah, so Martha, you probably can explain puberty blockers and hormones and how that therapy works.
Yeah, so initially, puberty blockers have been used historically, starting a few years before using them for trans kids, for children who started to go into puberty well before the age that we see as normal for going to puberty, for like 6 or 7 year old. And often there are reasons for that. There's an abnormality in the adrenal gland, or some sort of hormonal biological issue that those kids need to be treated. And so those kids, they say, have been carved out, that those kids will still be able to get the medications. But what we've seen with other issues is that once they do this for a medication, the pharmacists are really leery of filling medications. And then the medication cost goes up and up, and it just becomes this whole nightmare for authorization for us to provide kids medically necessary care. But the other thing with side effects and with using medications that haven't been explored or studied well in kids is that's so many of the medications that we use in kids have only been studied in adults, because drug companies don't see a lot of monetary reward for studying them in younger children. And so we use a lot of things off-label for kids, unfortunately. And as Dr. Mack said, she would never be able to save a kid in the ICU if she only used medications that were specifically approved for children. And then as another person brought up later on, and then I'll shut up, but there are a lot of medications that we don't question. I mean, birth control pills, we know do cause clots, but there's a risk-benefit analysis for every medication that we start. And then the other one that was brought up was Viagra, which causes heart attacks in men. But no one's questioning that indication. So there are a lot of medications that have side effects. But as Amberlyn was saying, previously, we always look at the risks and the benefits, and saving a life often it outweighs the very mild risks of, someone said during the testimony, if my child is more prone to having a hip fracture when she's 80 because of this, I'm willing to take that risk. So the osteoporosis is just kind of a red herring, in my opinion. They
latch on to the relatively rare side effects and amplify them if it suits their purpose. Let me go back a little bit. We talked about the puberty blockers. The next stage of treatment is hormones. At what point are they recommended?
I, in working with trans youth at Uplift, I have met youth who started puberty blockers around 13. Some of them didn't even start medical interventions until they were 16 or 17. It's another one of those cases where the care is tailored to the needs of the patient. And obviously, if a patient is questioning their identity you're not going to walk into the doctor and say, I'm not entirely sure I'm a boy, or I'm not entirely sure I'm a girl, and walk out with a bag of hormones. Typically, a lot of those first steps are, okay, well, do you want to be called by different pronouns? Do you want to cut your hair differently? This perception that gender affirming care is easy to get, it's not misleading. It is a lie. It is an outright lie. I had to pay out of pocket, out of state for some of my own medical care, the hormone replacement therapy that I take in the formulation that works for me is not covered by my insurance, so I pay out of pocket for that. And that process has just been, it has been a fight every step of the way. Just getting the letter F on my driver's license was a $3,500 court journey. So if anyone wants to, pretend that gender affirming care is easy to get, they are lying to you.
I'm going to go through some points in the bill. I'm trying to do this fairly quickly because what the bill actually does is important, but it's a little bit technical and difficult. Before I do that, I want to say that the purpose of this bill, the purpose of all this stuff in the legislature, is got nothing to do with kids, got nothing to do with transgender people. It is a political stunt for Republicans to fundraise and pander to their base and get reelected. Does anybody disagree with that assessment? All right, let's see what's in the bill. I'm going to put it on screen. We can all read it for those that want to read my notes here. A physician or mental health provider or other healthcare professional shall not knowingly provide gender transition procedures to a person under 18. And once again, this is not a law yet. This is still a bill. It will probably go to the House next week, and then it also has to clear the Senate and be signed by the governor. None of those things are certain. Those gender transition procedures include puberty blockers. We talked about hormones or surgery. So they want to prevent surgery that almost never happens. But as Amberlynn said, it can happen in some very rare but exceptional circumstances. A physician, mental health provider, or other healthcare professionals shall not engage in the provision or performance of gender transition procedures to a person under 18 years of age. These two things seem like they're the same thing, but there's a little bit of difference. By not engaging in the provision or performance, that is not recommending to someone that they go to someone else to get this done. I'm not sure I understand the legal technicalities of it, but it goes on to say this section may not be construed to impose liability on any speech protected by federal or state law, which is, First Amendment stuff. They can't tell you stuff that is First Amendment, making it sound to me like this particular provision is a gag order on medical professionals. Does anybody else see it that way or have something they want to say different about what that might be saying?
Well, when we think about the provision of mental health care for a child who is questioning their gender identity, gender affirming care is as simple as calling them by the correct pronouns. But it says that I cannot engage in any protocol that's gender affirming. So what exactly does that mean? And are you impeding upon my free speech by notating that I cannot call them by the appropriate pronouns, or by identifying that they are having difficulty living in their own skin? And some of the kids that I see, it is outside of my scope of practice to work with individuals with gender dysphoria. However, do they get to me first, and then I refer them to someone who does specialize in that care? But you're impeding the way that I can speak with my clients openly and honestly to get to the source of the issue that we're having. Frequently, we get to speak with some of the inpatient facilities within the upstate of South Carolina, and they are telling us already that these hospitals are inundated with transgender kids who are having so many thoughts of suicide. And part of that reason is they can't tell their parents. So now I'm going to have to out them to their parents and put them in danger. And our DSS system in South Carolina is already overwhelmed. It's not fair to put a child in danger.
The danger to kids part, totally ignored by the Republicans on the committees.
I think there's this misconception on the part of our legislators that that if kids go to counseling, they just need counseling, and then they'll be the sex that they were born at, their biological sex. And really, what we see is not that, but that things like their bill, things like the way the community perceives a child, that's what's causing the mental health issues. It's not that there's something innately wrong with the child that we can fix with a little bit of counseling. There is, it's more that our community is putting on these restrictions, and that's causing mental health distress in our kids, I think.
Yeah, if you could detransition a child with counseling or religion or something like that, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. My dad was a pastor. I went to seminary. I was in church, Southern Baptist churches all of my life. And that environment produced a trans child. And my daughter, as far as I know, is cisgender. So tell me how it's a social thing if a child being raised by a transgender parent isn't trans.
Yeah, I think some of the Republicans firmly believe that the idea of being transgender, even being gay, is not real. It's something that's imposed on you by society, by us lefty liberals in society, and it isn't real. And you can be counseled out of it. It's not a part of who people are. They have a very binary view of what gender identity is.
And let's just think about it. These children are absolutely coming from cis het parents. I can almost be the poster child there. I have 4 children, and out of the 4 children, there's 3 of them within the rainbow continuum and identify differently. So is it me? Am I the problem? Or is it the fact that my children feel safe enough to be able to express who they are and who they plan, who they love and what they're attracted to? I don't really see myself as the problem. I see myself as a good parent and a loving parent who is willing to do whatever it takes for my children.
Lacey, you might remember in one of the shows we did before about the library stuff, we had a gay teen as part of our panel. And one of the points that she made was that she is surrounded by cisgender literature, by ordinary straight literature, and yet she turned out gay. Does the literature, does the environment turn someone gay? If that's the case, it should have turned her straight, because that's most of what she saw. Do you remember that conversation?
I sure do. She so eloquently shared a lot of her story and information. Sorry, I had my little guy was coming in to show me his Lego creation.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we got kids. Everybody's got kids that are roaming around the house. And as I was explaining before we got started, it's okay to have families, and we're getting the privilege of talking to you guys for a long period of time, and the families will say, "What the hell, Mom? I need your attention." Okay, let me go back to looking at this bill here. If a patient is under 18 and they've already started the treatment, they have to stop. Now, I'm recognizing, and a lot of this language is the Republicans trying to keep themselves from getting in too much trouble, recognizing that some drug treatments shouldn't be stopped cold turkey, so they give you the chance to wean them off, but you're still going to stop them. So you may have someone that has started some of these at 14 or 15, and before they reach the age of 18, where all this becomes legal again, they got to stop. Here's another, what to me is a little bit of ambiguity. Nothing in this section prohibits a mental health provider from offering mental health services except those defined in the section that says what they can't do. What they can't do is offer puberty blockers, hormones, or surgery. So those are the things that are prohibited. Not mentioned is counseling. So is counseling okay? Can you talk about pronouns? Can you talk about lifestyle? Can you talk about clothes? Can you encourage a child as a counselor to use the pronoun they feel comfortable with, live in the lifestyle they feel comfortable with, and wear the clothes they feel comfortable with? Are those things still going to be open for counselors, school? Well, school is going to be a separate thing. We'll look at that in a minute. Mental health professionals, are those still okay?
It's to be seen, and I don't know one counselor that, has been providing any type of puberty blockers. I mean, ethically speaking, we don't diagnose. That's what medical doctors are for. So, when we talk about a little bit, talk about the legislation in some ways, who are these professionals? And, they had the provision in there about educators talking to their parents, and who are those professionals to diagnose any type of gender dysphoria? I know growing up, I was very much a tomboy. To this day, do not wear dresses. I'm not a heels type of person. Would it have been okay for someone to tell my mom that I didn't feel comfortable in my gender because of societal standards that are seen as feminine? I didn't start wearing makeup until I was in my 30s. So, where do we draw that line, and who are these professionals that we are talking about in this bill? I can't make diagnoses, so I would feel uncomfortable talking to a parent about, hey, you know what, your kid comes in my office, because I work with smaller kids, and there is not a male child that comes in my office that does not play with my Barbie dream house, that doesn't play with the kitchen set that is in my office. Are those things that I'm going to have to report to the parent? Hey, your kid identified his favorite colors are pink and purple. Is that something that I have to disclose to the parent? It's super unclear. It's as clear as mud, in my best Southern. It's as clear as mud what we are actually supposed to do and how this is applicable.
Yeah, you talked about the bill being, a lot, Gary, but it has to be intentionally worded fairly vaguely. Otherwise, it's blatantly discriminatory anyway, but it's the more vague they can be, the more they can plausibly deny the discrimination. Go look at most other bills that work on regulation in any area of our lives, and they are pages and pages long. And this is a 1.5 pager. While it is a well-polished turd, it is not thought through in the way that most of our legislation is, which also, in my opinion, lends to this is a bill that's emotionally written or was paid for.
Yeah. And once again, its purpose is not to actually do what it says it does. Its purpose is to score political points.
And I want to be clear about something. It plays into the fear and the anxiety of a child not fitting into societal norms. We are terrified. I am scared for my child's safety. This has impacted and affected every aspect of our lives. What college our kid is going to go to, is that state safe for them? The college that my child wants to attend is in Tennessee. Is my child going to attend any longer? No. Clemson has proven to not be safe for transgender students. Is that somewhere we're going to send our child? Absolutely not. We have that anxiety, those fears for our kid and their safety. And I think that deeply rooted, if parents examined what it is they're truly terrified, it is for their kids' safety. And the things that people will say in their communities about them as parents. And, fortunately or unfortunately enough, within the past few days, my husband's testimony has went viral. And it has taken both of us a pretty hard discipline to not read comments about what terrible parents we are. Now, we know personally that we're not bad parents. Our kids are pretty well adjusted. They're great, kind, respectful kids that love their life, but we're having all these negative and nasty comments from parents that are like, you have failed, you've done this and you've done that. And oh my goodness, I can't believe that. And I'm like, if they found out the rest of the story that we have more of, more children within the rainbow continuum within our house, what would they think about us then? But we really have to acknowledge that this is a process for both the child, for the medical health providers, for the mental health providers. Like, playing into that fear is really what they're going for, is your child is different and it's going to affect you as well.
Looking at a little bit more of the bill, I think maybe to sort of protect their butts, but also to maybe attempt to look a little bit sensitive. They note that there are treatments for what they're going to call disorders. I'm not sure about that word. Disorders for people with ambiguous or androgynous sex characteristics. Those would be characteristics. We know that there are people that are born with characteristics of both sexes. They may have genitalia that are of both sexes. And those people can be treated. Also, if someone has undergone treatment for gender dysphoria, that's what we're talking about here, the blockers, the hormones, or maybe even the surgery, and something has gone wrong, a doctor can fix it. A doctor can work on it. So very progressive of them to give us that capability that we can.
And I think it's important to say here that those intersex conditions, you can argue if a child were born with ambiguous genitalia and the parents decide what genitals that child keeps, what if that's not the child's gender identity? So, these things that they are defending are actually harmful procedures.
Public funds cannot be used directly or indirectly for gender transition procedures, so state ain't going to pay for it. The state's got Medicaid, and they're saying they can't pay for procedures until a patient is 26. So a big gap from when all of these things would be legal at age 18 to age 26.
And I think it's important to point out that when they say Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act is subsidized by the Medicaid program. So when they say they limit Medicaid, if you're on an Affordable Care Act plan or an Obamacare plan, as a lot of people like to call it, that is subsidized by the Medicaid program. So even if you're sitting there saying, I'm not on Medicaid, I've got Blue Cross Blue Shield, it can still impact you.
There's a penalty section. This is interesting. They didn't talk very much about this, although one Republican complained they didn't think the penalties were stringent enough. And that is that if a medical professional does something that is being prohibited by this, it's their licensing board that determines whether or not they actually did it and sets the penalty. So not being familiar with what those licensing boards may or may not do, it could be revoke your license, I guess, or censure, or who knows what. Martha, do you have any idea what licensing boards might do in terms of meting out a penalty?
So it's a good question. I think in general, what I've seen from our medical boards are that they are reasonable people. But again, I guess it would, we all try to follow the law. What this bill does is it puts us in conflict with the guidelines that kind of prescribe our care and help us know what's the right care to give to a child. And so that conflict between that and the state board would be something I think would have to probably go to court. I mean, I really don't know. I think this opens the door for a lot of expensive lawsuits for South Carolina. Again, if we lost a child due to suicide, where our guidelines told us that we should have provided gender affirming care and that was prohibited in our state, that really puts us between a rock and a hard place. And that inability to safely follow our guidelines makes it very hard to practice in South Carolina.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of fallout from this. In addition to the professional boards, licensing boards, anybody can sue. You can sue for compensatory damages, injunctive relief, declaratory relief, or any other appropriate relief that they couldn't think of to toss into the bill. And you can use this bill by asserting actual or threatened violation. I'm not sure what a threatened violation would be. Maybe you talked about doing something, but you didn't do anything about it. In any case, you can sue, anybody can sue, and you can use those things in making your claim, and you got 3 years to do it. And the Attorney General, the state, any agency officer or employee of the state can also bring suit. And now we come to a section that has, there was a lot of time spent in debating this or discussing this in the hearings, and that is the parental notification and outing of a kid who is experiencing maybe gender dysphoria. Here's what it says. The school, this is my language, not the bill's language, or the bill's language is full of legalese stuff. This is what I'm interpreting from it. School officials or staff cannot suggest to a kid that they not tell their parents. So once again, if the school staff or officials think a student may be exhibiting some form of gender dysphoria, they can't say, hey kid, maybe don't tell the folks. They can also not tell the parents themselves.
There's still vague language about not withholding.
They're being told that they cannot withhold it from the parents, but the bill doesn't say who is responsible for telling the parents. No.
Okay. There's no recognition or contingency that telling the parents might be dangerous to a kid. They absolutely did not discuss or recommend or have any thoughts about that. Because, as we said, ain't no kid in South Carolina been whooped upside the head for telling their parents they are gay or trans. Just does not happen here in South Carolina. Where are we in the governmental process? It's not a law yet. It passed through 2 committees. It's going to the full House sometime next week, we expect. South Carolina's a little late in doing this. There's like 22 other states that have already done it. Something like this is on the books. We don't know what's going to happen in the Senate. The Senate has to also approve the bill, just like in the U.S. legislature. The Senate and the House have to approve the same version of a bill before it can go on to the governor to be signed into law. So this is all going to happen again in the Senate if the Senate decides to take it up. Do we know if it's even in a committee yet somewhere in the Senate?
No, it has to be debated in the House first.
Okay, so the House has to finish their process before it goes to the Senate. Does South Carolina have a bathroom bill? Are there any other trans-specific laws that are on the books in South Carolina now?
There is a bathroom bill that is proposed, unsurprisingly, by Representatives Trantham, Beach, and Aremus. Oh, and Cromer. Yeah. There is not currently a bathroom law in place in South Carolina. Last year, or year before last, we had H4776, which was, they named it the Medical Right of Conscience Bill, which allows, for example, if Dr. Edwards didn't want to treat me because I am trans or because I have rainbow colored hair or whatever, she has a right to not give me care, and I'm not suggesting that you would do that. There was also the ban on transgender students in school sports. There were 4 or 5 students in the past 10 years who had participated in or who had even applied to participate in school sports, and out of that only half of them were allowed to. So there were like 2 kids in South Carolina in the past 10 years that this legislation was necessary to discriminate against. So those are the 2 big laws that I'm aware of right now, and there are at least a dozen bills filed that impact our community, including this one. There is a bathroom bill. There's one that messes with legal documentation to make it harder to update legal documents. There's just a lot out there.
I keep going back to Michael O'Brien, who's one of the residents out of Charleston. I mean, I think his point was so good that, really the number one cause of death in kids is gun violence, firearm injuries. We see hunger every day in our clinics and in our hospitals. We see mental health struggles that we really need to do a better job with in this state. We see people who can't access safe care or good care without going to the emergency rooms, and then they get huge bills and can't pay for it. There are so many issues that they could be dealing with, and then we have these very rare, nobody's causing trouble, but yet this was the very first thing they targeted this year.
Politics, do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, politics.
Yeah.
The only thing I've got left to do is play some video. There are, I've got a few pieces from the testimony that you guys gave, a few pieces from what the representatives have responded to or questions that they asked, and then a little bit from the actual committee that voted it to the full House. There's no public comment in their session. It was just the representatives talking to each other and making some political grandstanding. I've held you as long or longer than I promised, so you guys can just log off. And thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your being part of the program. Invaluable. And I hope that people out there in television land, in York County Democratic Party, YCDP-TV land, have a chance to understand both transgender issues and what's going on with this bill a little bit. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it is Jessica who is still with me. Everybody else had to go. Appreciate your sticking around. Let's listen to what a few people said. The first one is Elizabeth Mack. She's she's a medical doctor, president of the South Carolina chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and she's the current president. Dr. Edwards is vice president, I think. And let's just take a look and see what she had to say.
My name is Elizabeth Mack. I'm a pediatric critical care physician and president of the South Carolina chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm here in opposition to H 4624. And there's a lot of misconception about gender affirming care, so I really wanted to do a little myth busting here today. Number one, there is no gender confirmation surgery occurring here in minors in South Carolina. None. Number two, gender affirming care, as Dr. Greenhouse said, occurs with the intense involvement of parents. Minors are not making these decisions solo. And a quote from the AAP guidelines, even when in states where minors may access care without parental consent for mental health services, contraception, STIs, parental or guardian consent is required for hormonal care of patients who identify as trans. Number three, half of trans kids consider suicide and a third attempt suicide because of bullying such as this and forced outing. And I see these children in the ICU. I've pronounced several dead. Number four, mental health assessment and counseling is a prerequisite of the care in children with gender dysphoria, both in practice and according to the guidelines, and this would be made illegal in this bill. To be clear, there's no such thing as a child coming in after watching a video on social media saying, I think I'm trans, and then we start them on meds. That just doesn't happen and can be taken off the list of concerns. Number five, gender affirming care is not fringe care. It's evidence-based standard of care because it is suicide prevention care with strict guidelines intimately involving parents and caregivers. And if it becomes illegal, our trainees will need to learn this care elsewhere and we will be at risk of malpractice.
I
Whoa.
think we got the volume turned up on that alarm.
I think you do.
Well, Representative Sessions.
You referred to some guidelines. Can you educate us? What guidelines are you referring to?
Yep, so there are several sets. They're very aligned. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, evidence-based guidelines on gender affirming care, the WPATH guidelines.
Who authors those guidelines? Do those come from, say, another national sort of medical association?
There's no mainstream organization that doesn't support gender affirming care. Then in specific reference to the guideline development, yes, those are groups of experts from those organizations that come together, that provide the care, that look at the evidence in a very strict way, and they say, okay, what's good for kids and what makes sense, in terms of the family unit and how we care for kids in a very family-based way.
When did those guidelines, when were they produced?
The AAP guidelines were just reaffirmed last year, so in 2023.
So they're addressed annually or biannually, some sort of periodic method?
Yeah, if there are major edits that occur related to the evidence that's published in the meantime, then certainly they would be revisited sooner, and then otherwise they're revisited every 5 years.
In the membership of these associations,
Yep.
all physicians?
Not all physicians, mostly pediatricians and pediatric subspecialists, over 70,000 members in the AAP.
And then do these associations or boards, do they vote to accept those guidelines, or how does that work?
Certainly, if there is a guideline published, then the board would have to vote, and the board does vote in support of those guidelines.
Is it true that the FDA has not approved puberty blockers to actually be used for gender dysphoria?
Most medications used in children do not have a label for their use. Like if I only used medicines that were on label in the ICU, I wouldn't really have any options to use. So that's not really like a comparator in pediatric medicine. And the reason for that is because there aren't a lot of studies in children, because we always start with adults first. But to get to the point, they're certainly safe, and we use them actually for a variety of indications. So endometriosis, actually in adults, various cancers, but in children, PCOS. Precocious puberty is actually probably the most common indication. Though we don't use them at this age in gender affirming care, we can use these medicines very young in kids without concerns.
It is not FDA approved for that use though, right?
I can check.
Okay. Follow-up question on that. Is there a warning label on puberty blockers from the FDA that actually states that it increases suicidal thoughts?
No. The black box warning was related to pseudotumor cerebri, which I'm happy to explain what that is.
Dr. Mack, thank you so much for being here today for your testimony.
Dr. Elizabeth Mack, lots of very authoritative information. Don't care.
They did not listen.
No.
They didn't care.
Didn't listen to any of this. A little bit shorter from Dr. Edwards, who was here on our panel just a moment ago. Let's see what she had to say.
Dr. Martha Edwards. I've practiced pediatrics, general pediatrics in Rock Hill, South Carolina for the past 25 years. And I oppose this bill. Many of the children I see in my office are struggling with anxiety and depression, trans children, due to bullying in schools and due to their fear of being their authentic selves in a school or community setting, often due to things like this that are making them feel like they're at risk, there's something wrong with them. Recently, I had a 12-year-old patient who came in with mom for an annual physical. This was a biological boy who presented with decidedly feminine features. And I asked what pronouns this child preferred, and the child looked at his mother and she said, "It's okay, be honest." And the child replied, "Well, at home, I usually choose she, her pronouns. And I have for many years. My parents allow me to be who I want to be at home. At school, though, my parents and I feel it's not safe for me to do that. So I go by he, him pronouns at school. Because we live in South Carolina," this child said. With my simple question, that's providing gender affirming care. I didn't prescribe hormones or puberty blockers. They weren't asking for that. But it's just providing supportive care for the whole child, to affirm for this child that I'm going to be there for mental and physical health issues, no matter what happens. And if he gets so distressed that he needs puberty blockers, I will refer and we'll proceed in that direction. Unfortunately, many children are not supported by their parents, and they're the ones that show up in the ICUs and in the ERs. This bill encourages parents to practice judgment and shame rather than unconditional support and love for their children. As a pediatrician, I'll always encourage that we practice unconditional love both at home and in our community for all children.
So were you there in person, or were you one of the people that was on the Zoom for them?
I was in person.
Was that warning klaxon, was that as loud as it sounds here?
Oh, the time bell?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it was much lower in person, much lower.
Oh, okay. As I was listening to the playback to their video, it's like, wow.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that loud, I promise.
Yeah. Plus, what the heck? I mean, it's super annoying, and I would call it rude. They could come up with all kinds of other noises. I guess they've realized that they need something that is going to catch people's attention.
Just to be honest, there were so many passionate people there. I'm the only one that finished actually at the 2-minute mark on the dot.
Yep. Most and they were a little bit accommodating. They let people go over 10, 20 seconds or so, finish a thought. But if they sounded like they were then going to move on to another thought, then they shut them down. The next guy is Jace is the executive director of the ACLU in South Carolina, and let's see what he had to say. If I get the right button to push here.
I live just down the road on Columbia, but I grew up in upstate South Carolina. Growing up, I was a straight A student. In fact, I graduated college from USC without ever having made a B. But that's not because I was so devoted to my studies. It was because I was trying to be perfect. Perfect for my parents, for my church, for my teachers, because I believed there was something wrong with me. I haven't always had words for it, but I am transgender. As my 8-year-old son puts it, I was born with a girl body, but a boy heart, a boy mind, a boy soul. There was a time in my life where I didn't understand that about myself, and there was no one I could turn to help me sort it out. I felt so alone, lost, misunderstood, that I attempted suicide. Not because there's something wrong with me, but because I lived in a world that rejected me. I left South Carolina in 2010 because I couldn't imagine a future here. I went to Colorado, where I started therapy. No transgender person gets care without therapy first. And with the help of my therapist, I was able to access the care I needed to transition to be the man I am today. I've never looked back. I have peace. I have joy. I have confidence in who I am. And in 2022, after 12 years away, I moved back home to South Carolina. And I came back because I love this state and I want to be a part of making it a better place for transgender people like me. So I came home to serve as the executive director of the ACLU of South Carolina. And I urge you not to pass this bill.
Jace Woodrum's testimony is very powerful and impactful for me. Jace actually graduated from the high school that my trans child currently attends.
As he mentioned, and some others have mentioned, they are making choices that they're making because we live in South Carolina. Jessica, you and I know we live in South Carolina.
Yes.
We know what that means. We're not running. We're trying to change things. It's going to take a while. We're not running away. But,
this is my state. I'm notorious for saying this is my state. I can trace my family lineage back to the early 1700s on the property that I live on right now. You're not sending me anywhere. I'm not going anywhere.
Yep. All right. This is Amberlynn's presentation to the committee.
Thank you for hearing me today. My name is Amberlynn Boyder, and I'm a wife and mother living in Spartanburg. To be clear about my background, I was born and raised in the upstate. My dad was a Southern Baptist preacher, and I was always at church because I loved hearing my dad preach. I got saved at age 7 and rededicated my life at 14. I worked with youth groups for years. I played in the band at 2 Southern Baptist megachurches and performed for the South Carolina Baptist Association's annual meeting. While I don't know what it's like to be a trans youth who received that medically necessary care, I do know what it was like to not receive it. Because my parents refused that care, Puberty caused permanent, irreversible damage to my body, and it caused me to experience a much harder life than I would have otherwise. And by the way, parents still have the right to deny that treatment to their children. When I hear my daughter laugh, I know I'd move mountains to keep her happy, including giving her medical care if she needs it. I hope you will all as well by rejecting this bill, and may God compel you to ask thoughtful questions.
Yeah. She hoped. Yep.
Yeah, and there was nothing.
Yep. Okay, this is Zoe Gloss, and she is just going to introduce a letter, just not going to hear the whole letter, just the introduction of one from an anonymous kid because they live in South Carolina.
Hi, my name is Zoe Gloss, and I just want to thank the chairman and the subcommittee for allowing us to speak today in opposition of H4624. I would like to first share with you an anonymous letter we received from a South Carolina teenager. Hi, I am a 17-year-old trans kid in South Carolina. I cannot give you my name because I am one of the trans youth who are at a risk of physical harm if my family were to find out I were trans.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Risk of physical harm. That's what I wanted to bring up, that's what many of us, that's what we're afraid of. That's what the Republicans...
And I see it.
I'm sorry?
I see it almost on a weekly basis.
Yeah, the Republicans just not paying any attention to that. They, as far as they're concerned, that problem doesn't exist. This is Chase Glenn. He's Executive Director for the Alliance for Full Acceptance from down in Charleston. He is also a trans male. There are a lot of trans people that came to testify, as you might expect, even though it can be a little risky and scary for them.
Thank you for this time, this opportunity to speak against House Bill 4624. My name is Chase Glenn. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Full Acceptance and AFA Action, an LGBTQ advocacy organization based in Charleston. I'm 45 years old. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 young children. I'm also a transgender man. Thinking back to my childhood, I can look back and pinpoint core memories where at a very early age, began to feel what I would now describe as this incongruence inside of me. The sense that something inside of me just didn't line up with the expectations that were put on me to be a little girl. I grew up in the 80s in a small town in Southern Illinois at a time when I had very little exposure to the LGBTQ plus community. I didn't think I knew any single gay or transgender person. I didn't have the language that we have now to describe what I was feeling, but it manifested earliest as anxiety and accessing gendered spaces like public restrooms, to the point that from elementary school through high school, I never used a public restroom in my school. This meant limiting intake of fluids, watching what I would eat, all in a desire to not have to use a public restroom. As I began to go through puberty, I struggled with ongoing depression that dipped into really dark places. Again, didn't have the language to understand or express what I now know to be gender dysphoria, the root cause of my depression. And I secretly wondered if I could ever be truly happy, if I would be able to survive in this world, if the pain and turmoil that never seemed to go away might one day be so unbearable that I just couldn't take it anymore. Fast forward to around 18 years ago, when I was scrolling through YouTube, one day I saw a young man talking about his experience and describing some of the very feelings I'd had since an early age. For the first time, I knew I wasn't alone and that I had hope and a way out. It took me a number of years to fully process what this could mean for me, beginning and gathering as much information as possible. A social transition, if I just might have just one more moment, please. I began hormone therapy 9 years ago, and it changed my life. And it hurts my heart to think that there are kids today who could have access to that care that I didn't have access to as a kid, and that would now have that taken away from them. Please reject this bill.
That alarm is rude. So, yeah. Once again, hoping against hope that someone would pay attention. There were a lot of doctors that showed up here. Here's another doctor.
A lot of our conservative lawmakers have brought up the point that they don't want kids getting this care who aren't truly transgender, right? Nobody wants that. We don't want that. Part of getting kids into mental health, into counseling for years and years and years is making sure that we're not doing things that are irreversible to someone who doesn't need it. This bill is going to hurt those kids, and then who knows? They leave South Carolina and go get the care elsewhere. We could lead the Southeast, and we could do this responsibly if we allow our pediatricians, our mental health professionals to do their job and keep the state government out of it.
State government doesn't want to be kept out of it.
Right. Right.
Okay. That was Dr. Michael O'Brien. He's a pediatrics resident. And here is Lacey's testimony.
My name is Lacey Lane from York County. I'm a school counselor of 15 years, and I'm a mother of 2 children here in public schools. I'm testifying against H 4624, as it is a cruel and unnecessary bill that is harmful to trans students in many ways. As a school counselor, I'm aware that outing a student to their family can put them at risk for harm. Trans students are much more likely to be abused by their immediate family based on their gender identity. Familial rejection and abuse dramatically increase the risk of suicidality, substance abuse, and depression. Sadly, not every child can be their true selves at home without risking their physical and mental well-being. Forced outing bills like H 4624 are not about parental rights, they're about harming trans students. If this bill was really about parental rights, why does it take away my parental rights to make medical decisions for my own children? Gender affirming surgery is not explored until adulthood, so that's an unnecessary inclusion of the bill. A House Medical and Health Affairs Subcommittee that does not contain medical or mental health professionals should allow those in the medical and mental health profession to do their jobs without interference.
I understand you are a school counselor. Let's say that this bill passes and it is now law. And my question is, who's the best person on staff at the school to contact the parents? Was that the teacher? Is that the counselor, vice principal? Who would you, in your opinion, would be, if you were going to follow the law, who would be the best person to do that?
As the bill is written, a lot of parts are vague, so I would hope there would be a lot of explaining and training on the part of educators across the state on how to keep themselves safe legally, and also how to wrestle with the ethical nature. I know it's against my ethical standards as a school counselor to disclose such information that can be harmful for my students. As far as the bill is written, it looks like all public school staff. So I would assume that's teachers, that's administrators, that's school counselors. It's any staff that these children might come in contact and disclose anything about their gender identity. Or I would want to know more as a educator. Does this include gender expression? Does this include, hearsay? At which point would an educator be required to disclose? And again, as a school counselor of 15 years in this great state, and my educational experience, my ethical guidelines, this is harmful. So I hope that this doesn't come to be a bill. But as it's written, it would be any one of those people that would have to do the disclosure.
You made the comment that you are a school counselor and that you feel like it is dangerous to inform parents when children come to you about issues with themselves. But in the same instance, you said that you felt that this bill was dangerous to tell you as a parent what you can and can't do for your child medically. Explain that to me, please.
When we're talking about disclosing a student's gender identity, if a student is not ready to disclose that with their parents, there's probably a reason for that, whether it's they know by their own personal lived experiences that that's not a safe situation for them to do so, or they're not at that part in their journey. That's not up for me as a school counselor, educator to make that jump for them. Now, as a parent, I have the opportunity to make medical decisions for myself, which is now limited by the state, I should say, because as a woman, those rights have been taken away from me. But I do have those abilities, and for my own children as well. And when we have an overreaching bill like this, this now eliminates that healthcare that could be necessary should my children, disclose to me that that is part of their identity journey.
But if we don't inform the parents that these children are having these thoughts or feel this way, how can they get them the appropriate help?
You're saying if they need this support, parents could be the ones to help guide them. And I would agree that those parents who are supportive are probably going to be the ones that find out first, because they have raised their children in a home where they know that their children can come to them and disclose and share information and feel supported and safe in doing so. As a professional, I would use my best judgment with whatever student I was working with, and I would have to go with the information that they disclose as far as their comfort, as far as those risk factors would go. I'm always going to encourage students to be open and honest with their parents. I do, as a parent, respect and understand that that's what all parents want. They want that connection and communication with their students. But I also know in my 15 years of experiences as a counselor that not all of our students across the state have that type of love and support within their home. So while I would hope that I can encourage
them to disclose that information, I hope that it's not forced upon me to disclose it for them, because that can do harm for the ways that I listed and for all of the studies that exist out there and for all the information shared by the medical professionals that spoke with y'all today.
So,
did phenomenal. She nailed it.
Yeah, that dialogue and some of the questions that the representatives were asking does bring up a conundrum that I'm seeing within the structure of the bill and how we want to deal with parents and parents' rights. A parent who is going to be supportive needs to know, and maybe the child still hasn't felt comfortable even to what potentially would be a supportive parent, needs to know what's going on with their kid. On the other hand, a parent that is very opposed to the idea of anything gay, transgendered, lesbian, the Rainbow Coalition, there are parents out there that will do violence to their kids, kick them out. We mentioned that there are homeless shelters where there are kids who have been kicked out of their homes because the parents found out that they were gay or lesbian or somewhere in that Rainbow Coalition. The Republicans' side of that cudgel are, you got to tell the parents no matter what, paying no attention to the idea that telling some parents might be really bad for the kids.
Here's the thing is we don't have ownership over our kids. We guide, we discipline them the best that we know how, but ultimately they are their own individuals who will do what's best for them and how they feel. It's not a cut and dry thing. They do end up growing up. And what will that relationship look like with the parents if we are being hateful to a community that they may or may not know that their child belongs to?
The Republicans are using it exclusively from the idea of you must tell the parents' rights, and ignoring the idea that could be a really bad idea. This next speaker, Kelly Mayo, has, I'm not going to play her everything she testified to, just a little bit, an interesting perspective on where she came from. Let's take a listen.
My name is Kelly Mayo. I'm originally from Beaufort. I was born and raised there, and Columbia has been home for the last 22 years. I come to you as the mother of a trans child who was not always informed. I didn't know. And I said a lot of problematic things at one point, thinking that I was speaking the right thing. So I would encourage everyone to please do your own research. Look for it. It's all still very new research, but it's there.
What was your experience when you started to recognize what was going on with your kids, or they were expressing it to you? Had you already been deep in the community?
And there are still things I'm learning to this day. But yes, I'd always kind of been in the community. I was fortunate. And I kind of say, I grew up in a very small town, went to a very small high school. I think there was 125 of us that graduated high school. But I was fortunate enough to grow up with multiple members of my family that were within that rainbow continuum, one being trans. And so I knew a lot more than most. And unfortunately, my aunt has passed away before I had my children. So I knew unequivocally that I loved her, and she was the cohesive member of our family. And when she died, our family just kind of went their own ways and never really talked anymore. But I knew that I loved her, and that was it. There was no ifs and buts and whats. And, I came from a really uneducated family, very church oriented. And I knew if my grandmother could love my aunt unconditionally, there is no excuse for anyone else.
Your kids are lucky. No, a lot of kids out there.
I was pre-planned to be their parent. I actually went to a very conservative university. I went to Anderson University, and one of my first religion classes, I wrote a paper about how would you raise a gay child? Would you love and accept them and back it biblically? I think it was about 4 years later that I had kids, and it just blows my mind and it all kind of fell into place. And that professor is now one of my trans kids' teachers at high school. So, I mean, that's how small of an area I live in. Like, there's all these overlaps. So I do feel like I was made to be their mom.
I got some video that will take us into the mindset of of some of the Republicans. They tend to be guarded. They tend to not want to be too obvious about what they're saying, but sometimes they just can't help themselves. And here is Representative Jordan Pace.
I think I'm the only former educator on this panel, and it just strikes me as odd that if I was in the classroom and I knew that one of my students was suffering from any list of these things, and I hid that from a parent, I would not be doing my job.
Not doing his job. Got to tell the parent, no matter what the consequences might be. That part of it, blinders, just can't see that part. He's got to do his job. There are some Democrats on this panel. This is Representative Gillard, if I'm pronouncing his name right. Let's see what he's saying.
We're sitting here listening, to each other, and questions come to mind. How many, we are up here. How many doctors do we have on this panel? Child psychiatrists. I'm not going to tell a mother what they should do with their child. That's between the mother and the child, the doctors, the patients.
There were Democrats there. Unfortunately, in our state legislature, they are vastly outnumbered. I think there were only 2 in the subcommittee and maybe 3 in the full committee. So, they could express themselves just like everybody else did, all they want. And it is going to deaf ears like this one.
There are cases right now in South Carolina where there are children who were obviously suffering from some, for me it's a mental disorder, for others it's gender dysphoria, but they're suffering from something. And everybody in the school knew it, all the kids knew it, but the parents didn't know it. And now, one of those parents in particular is being told what they have to call their child, or else they'll be reported to DSS for not referring to their child by the pronoun that their child wants to be referred to. Nobody in the school would tell the parent that this was going on. I think that's a disgrace. I think if we have public schools that are supposed to protect our children and educate our children, that when they refuse to go to a parent and tell them there's something unusual going on with your child, if I were a principal in a school like that and I had a teacher that refused to do that, I'd probably be disciplining the teacher and making sure the parent understood what's going on with their child.
Well, isn't that a part of understanding what's going on with the child?
No, you're being way too reasonable about this. Okay, this is next is Fawn. Okay, I can't pronounce her name right. Fawn Pellegrino. Yeah, let's see what she has got to say to us.
For me, this is not to stop anyone from choosing how they want to live or think that anybody who is trans is a bad person or anything like that. I have friends of all different backgrounds, but I actually do come from the medical field. I actually worked in EMS, and I also worked at a doctor's office. I've administered medications. So my viewpoint on this bill, WPATH is the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. They actually put in their new standards that these surgeries that are irreversible in a lot of ways, that you should be 17 before you actually move forward with any of these surgeries that change your body and you are irreversible. And then the Endocrine Society actually states that they think you should be 18. So I think that's important to take into consideration, as well as the fact that a lot of the puberty blockers and hormone therapy medications are not FDA approved for that purpose. And there's no studies that actually show the long-term effects or give the pros and cons and weigh them. So for me, that's why I'll be voting for this bill. It's not to hinder anybody from choosing to live their life how they want to. I just think that those are decisions that should be made once you're 18 years of age. Thank you.
How progressive of her to recognize that people can live their lives as they want as long as they're 18, because none of this happens before you're 18.
Right.
And plus, she gets to cherry pick her studies and reports and conclusions. Those of you in the YCDP-TV audience will be glad to know that we have reached the end of everything I've got to show you, except for one thing, and that is the vote. Let's take a look at the vote.
Mr. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
No.
Mr. O'Neill,
Aye.
Mr. Pace, Ms. Petalino, Mr. Pendarvis, Mr. Sessions, Mr. Smith, Mr. White.
Aye.
The bill passes as amended.
And of course it does. Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate your sticking around with me.
Thank you for having me.
And I will close the program and let you go on your weekend. Thanks very much.
All right.
Good talking.
Thank you.
And everybody else who's been on the panel. Thanks a lot.